All right, guys, welcome to another video. Today, I'm going to define, I'll go over how I would define a best march, right? So we see it a lot, tier lists, the best 3 march pairing, the best march in the game, all that stuff. Just realize that no one's, as far as I can tell, has actually put a definition on it. So I'll attempt to put a definition. It is actually a lot more complex than it seems, and I think it'll be a fun thing to do, right? So first, we'll talk about why define it, because once you define it, all of a sudden there's a metric or a way to determine this, right? Or else one person could think that the best march in the game is the best march at dueling, right? Another person could think it's just the march that does the most damage, right? And once we put a definition on it, or at least I'll put my definition on it, when I talk about what I think the best march is the game, hopefully people will at least know in what context I'm talking about. And it actually makes this, I feel like a lot more solid discussion because a lot of times people will start arguing whether one march is better or another. Maybe they just have a different definition, right? We'll talk about attributes of a individual marches that kind of make up the whole, right? So for example, damage is one, tankiness is another, march speed would be another, right? Then there's actually different scenarios, right? So for example, a march like Lucha Alex could be really good in short duration scenarios, right? Basically cheeseburgering, getting cheeseburger, basically where you make contact and you disengage, but not be really good at dueling, right? So depending on how people actually define this, it changes how they value each march, right? And then finally, just a quick talk on being able to think for yourself, right? Because that's actually where you're the most empowered. We'll talk about some aspects of critical thinking, what gets in the way of people being able to critical think, and then that's what I'm going to talk about today for the video. All right, so first of all, why define this, right? It's not a mistake, right? On there, I'm actually talking about fitness, right? Which doesn't necessarily go with ROK, it should, but the reason why I'm talking about fitness though is because if you guys didn't know, in real life, I own a gym, right? I'm going on my 11th year. It's actually a CrossFit gym, right? I personally have been doing CrossFit for almost 16 years now. I've been coaching for about 13 years. And then I've owned this gym going on 11 years, right? So I want to say I'm the most experienced in the world, but it's probably like top 0.1% as far as in the CrossFit world from doing it and also coaching it. It's been a decent amount of time. And the reason why I bring this up is because the guy that made up CrossFit essentially it started with a definition of fitness, right? I think he saw like a magazine cover of some guy that did the Ironman, and it says the fittest person in the world. They got him to thinking, well, how do you define fitness, right? And he essentially came up with this idea that, okay, fitness is 10 domains, right? So there's strength, there's speed, there's balance, there's flexibility, there's agility, like the ability to actually like move around in sports, right? And the person that is the most well-balanced, basically the person that can perform the best overall is the fittest, right? So as you can imagine, that probably made a lot of people mad because by that definition, someone who's at the top of their sport, who's like smashing it in the Boston Marathon, which is one of the hardest marathons to cross to qualify for, right? But they could be really good at running distance, but let's just say they're not very strong, they can't deadlift their own body weight. Well, by CrossFit's definition, they're really good in one or maybe two components, but there's a huge weakness in another, right? So by that definition, they're not actually really fit overall, right? So you can see how it could ruffle some feathers, right? But what I like about this is when I first heard this, it was brilliant, right? Because I had never thought about it that way. If anything, and I think a lot of people watching the video will probably fall into this trap, is that we almost tend to think someone is fit or not by how they look, right? How little body fat they are. If you don't have a lot of body fat, you can see someone's abs, right? Because you can sit up in a bed, you have abdominal muscles, right? The reason why we can't see it for most of people, obviously not the people watching this video because we all have six packs, is because there's fat over your abs. If there's no fat, then you can see the abs, right? But being able to see someone's abs doesn't actually mean that their core is strong. It just means their body fat's low, right? So this definition for fitness essentially comes down all about functionality or the ability to perform and not so much looks, right? And I think that's a very important thing to differentiate, because as soon as you put that definition out there, all of a sudden we could start getting very performance oriented when we're defining fitness, and then take out the looks completely, right? It doesn't mean this is the right definition. It's just a CrossFit definition. All right, so today I'm going to attempt to actually define the best march from a ROK perspective, right? So let's actually get into individual marches and then their attributes, right? So the top 4, right? Every march has a certain amount of damage they do, tankiness, march speed, and then what I call like hidden benefits. It's not so much that it's hidden, like no one can see it. It's that it's very hard to measure in reports. And then I'm talking about stuff like group buffs or debuffs or things where maybe you're putting a shield on 3 of your allies, right? Well, it doesn't show up in your report. How do you actually measure how good that is? And I talked about this in the past. When it comes to like buffs and debuffs, in my opinion, probably the best you can do is theory craft a lot of it. And then you could try to run some like 5-on-5 tests, but you'll see when we get into scenarios, a 5-on-5 test doesn't actually cover the scenarios that most people are in when they're fighting on the field, right? Now, I'm going to go over each one of these attributes and then just talk about some of the stuff I think like people almost gloss over or don't realize, right? So if you don't know, when you see a white damage on the screen, right, when you're connecting with an opponent, every turn is actually about 400 damage factor, right? Because you're actually, every turn, you're dealing a basic attack, and then the person you're hitting is going to deal a counter attack back. Then they're going to deal a basic attack, and then you're going to deal a counter attack back, right? So the basic attack is about 200 damage factor, but the counter attack, depending on whether you have a boost or an increase to your counter attack, could be above 200. So we usually say roughly 400 damage factor per white number every turn, right? If you're talking about the average time it takes, if it's 1,000, you have 1,000 rage requirement to fire the active skill, on average, it'll take you about 8 turns, right? By the 8th turn, that's 8 rounds of 400 white damage. That's actually 3,200 damage factor that you've already dealt. When I hear people talk about damage of a commander or a march, it's almost like that doesn't exist. We almost only focus on the active skill, right? Right now, there's no active skill that actually does more than 3,200 damage factor. Why do we treat like that doesn't exist, right? Which is one, it's crazy to me. Now, what gets a little crazier is you don't actually fire your active skill if you hit the rage bar on turn 8 until turn 10. Because once you hit the rage bar, right, you get to the 1,000 rage, there's actually a second of downtime. That's going to be round 9 or turn 9. And you're actually going to fire that active skill on turn 10, right? So by the time you actually fire your active skill and it hits the opponent, you would have done 10 turns of white damage, which is 4,000 damage factor, right? So I would implore you, if you're watching this video, factor that into how you evaluate a march. Right? If you're just looking at active skill, you're not taking into account, wow, normal damage increase actually means something, right? Actually, a lot more than what most people think. You're not properly evaluating a march, right? When it comes to tankiness, right? I feel like tankiness is severely underrated right now, right? Because the whole idea is, and by the way, it'll be either the next video or the video after that. This whole meta, this idea where launching your active skill first will help you win is just not true. I have testing that proves that. And also, it's just very, very reductive, and there's a lot more to that, right? Ideally, you can launch an active skill, right? But if you actually watch my last video talking about opportunity cost, what are you sacrificing to launch an active skill first? There's actually a break-even point where if you're sacrificing too much, launching the active skill first isn't worth it, right? But tankiness is something where if you guys look at any active skill, right, for the most part, well, at least the legendary commander, some of the epic ones, when you hit multiple targets, you don't actually lose 15% per additional target hit, right? Even if your march is, say, at like 30%, it's red on the field, right? And it's not doing as much damage. It's actually there to tank a lot of other damage, which really, really helps in a murder ball. But if that march of yours has a good buff, and especially a good debuff, you're actually still providing a lot of value on the field, right? Never mind that if the march is tanky, when it gets kind of like secondary AoE damage, it's going to stay healthy or higher troop count for a lot longer, which will allow you to do a lot more damage. But even when the march gets lower and lower, if it has a good buff and debuff, it's still going to provide a lot of value. And even if it doesn't have that, if you're tankier on the field, right, you can actually still help mitigate or spread out damage. So you're still benefiting your side, right? That's just some of the benefits of tankiness. right? But for the most part, we talk about tankiness like it's not that important, which is just not that true. March speed, I'm not going to cover too much. The only thing I'm going to say in addition is that March speed, there actually can be marches that go too fast, right? And I talked about this in a previous video. If a march is way faster than all your other marches, and let's just say you're running 5, right? The first march that connects is going to be the one that fans out the furthest, right? If you connect a lot sooner than all your marches connect, right, that first march is going to swing out into a bad position a lot faster. Usually it's going to be, in a worse position. So it's going to take just bad trades by positioning, right? So sometimes it's actually a good thing to reduce some march speed, whether through the talent tree or maybe take off something that you're putting onto that commander was giving it more march speed. So the march speed of all your marches are a lot more balanced so that you're actually hitting whatever it is that you want to hit a lot closer to the same time. So you could actually maximize your damage, right? Hidden benefits or buffs and debuffs, like shields, right? Like if you're shielding like 3 of your allies, that's a hidden benefit, right? It's not going to show up in reports, but it is valuable. It's not super valuable, right? Now, out of all the hidden benefits, buff, debuffs, shield, all that stuff, healing, to me, by far the best one would be debuffs when you're making an opponent take more damage, right? Because if I'm making an opponent take 15% more damage, or let's just say use Belisarius, where you're taking 12% more damage, this is what makes Belly better than most people think. Because it's instant, right? If you're surrounding the target, right? But every single march, hitting that march that Belly is connected to is going to be dealing 12% more damage, right? So it doesn't just scale up to your marches, right? If a march is out of position slightly, and all of a sudden 12 marches are hitting that, including your Belly, all 12 of those marches are going to instantly get the 12% more damage dealt to that target, in addition to all the benefits it gets to surrounding a target, right? So that's why for me personally, I highly value debuffs to the opponent when they're taking a lot more damage. And I feel like at the very least, I want people to get how important it is, and then how you want to value that when it comes to quote unquote the best march, I guess is up to you, right? But that's something I put a lot of value on and just kind of want to highlight how great it is, right? The next two, right, the asterisk is the fun and trades. Okay, let's go over fun first. All right, fun is obviously subjective. For me, I like marches that do a lot of damage. I like marches that actually do a lot of like additional damage, instant proc, things that just keep popping off, or just big like damage numbers, right? That's really fun. Marches that actually will I mean, this is like, I don't know if this will ever happen, right? But you know how in Champions Olympia, you could actually stun a target and they're just sitting there not doing anything, right? Marches that can like slow another march down, like if you hit it so they can't run away and you can chase them down, is really fun. And then personally, I'm a troll, right? So marches that really annoy the crap out of other people. Probably one of the reasons why I like Siege, because people hate Siege. There's nothing more annoying. There's probably, I mean, I could probably name something, but getting hit by a Siege that's just like parked in a convenient location, not on the front lines, that just like pelting you, right? People will actually do some crazy things to go get that Siege where they're way out of position. They'll like sacrifice 5 of their marches to take down your T4 Siege, take terrible trades just to sad face your Siege, right? Which and it's totally worth it. You can sacrifice your Tier 4 Siege to take out 5 marches. That's great, right? So like fun also factors into a march's attribute for me, and that's just kind of how I define it. I think everyone would define it a little bit differently. And then finally, let's go over trades, right? I think there is a strong emphasis on trades, and it is important because what trades tell you, right, is essentially how much resources and speeds you are using relative to the opponent, right? So if you're trading massively positive, maybe for every like billion food you're using, you're making the opponent use 3 billion food, right? That's going to drain them a lot faster, right? Because ROK isn't just, oh, you wipe their ball once, it's done. It's okay, they'll keep coming back, you're going to keep coming back. But at some point, people either get drained by their resources, their speeds, or they're just mentally drained. Or, the girlfriend capital, where they use up all their capital with a girlfriend and they can no longer play because they're going to get broken up with. They're done, right? Whatever it is, right? But trades, at the very least, one, it helps you with resource and speeds. But 2, there's a psychological component, right? If you're always trading positive, it just feels like you're winning, because you are, and you have momentum, and psychologically it's very, very beneficial. And also usually if you're playing right and you trade well, then that means your side is also like winning, right? So there's a lot that goes into that. So when I'm looking at attributes of a march, these are all attributes that I factor in when I'm evaluating how good of a march is. And if I wanted to use the CrossFit model on how you define the best march, I would say it has to be the best combination of these attributes, right? Because if it's not right, if it's just damage, if it's just march speed, it's just fun, like you're actually missing out on something, right? So again, this is just my definition. It's not the right definition, but this is how I would go about it. And I actually went on Google and just found some of these old commander tier lists. It's actually interesting to see, at one time, Artemisia, right, or Attila, or Guan, or Ramses was considered a S tier commander in February 2021, apparently. So that's very, very interesting. All right, next let's talk about scenarios, right? And this is Shinchi, used to be a content creator. He quit the game a while ago now, right, but decided to use a picture of his, right? There's actually lots of different scenarios when it comes to fighting in the open field, right? One, there's duels, where there's not just one-on-one, but sometimes it could be 5-on-5, right? Like 5 of yours against other, or like 7-on-5, whatever. Or it could be like 10-on-10, like smaller balls, right? Where it's essentially dueling, but like two players versus 2 players or something, right? There's the short duration fights, which if you look, I actually kind of got distracted. I didn't finish this. When I put low, I just mean how a march duels is low priority for me. It doesn't matter that much. But how a march does in short duration fights is very important, because in the game today, there's a lot of scenarios where you're not just going to be constantly connected to the target, right? If you're massively winning or you're massively losing, a lot of times you're going to be having short duration fights. Because if you're massively winning, usually you'll end up on the enemy's territory, and then you're going to get cheeseburger, right? So a very anti-cheeseburger march, like say Lucha Alex, has a lot of value, right? If you're massively losing, they're probably going to be on your territory with a lot more marches than your side. You're probably going to be cheeseburgering them. In that case, a march like Lucha Alex is very, very valuable, right? There's connected ball fights. I really see this at the highest Imperium level with a lot of players, where essentially the ball is, it looks like it's just not moving for like an hour, right? And then marches keep flowing in. You see the sap faces going out, but the marches just keep flowing in. And essentially you just come in and you're just launching skill cycle after skill cycle until you sap face, you bring it out, and then you just do that over and over again, right? So those are connected ball fights. Now, for a connected ball fight, for example, a march like ZL and Herman would be amazing, because that march probably does the most or the second most damage in the game in that scenario, right? And also because there's a lot of people on the screen, archers aren't targeted much, so that's where ZL Herman would really shine. Whereas if it's for example, a short duration fight, right, everyone's going to target the archer. They're going to cheeseburger the archer, and ZL Herman doesn't have a instant proc, right? They're not going to do as well, right? So when you're defining the best march, right, for me, it should be overall, right? And you can then, hopefully you understand the attributes of the march, so you can say, hey, you know what, for connected ball fights, ZL Herman would do amazing, right? But for short duration fights, ZL Herman isn't the best. It's okay, right? Then there's push pull fights, right? So this is a classic, this is a lot more common in ball fights, where you'll push in, you'll before you get out of position, you'll pull back, you push in, you pull back, right? And that kind of fighting is a little bit different for the connected ball fights. I put the asterisk for winning and losing, right? I mentioned when you're massively winning, you're usually going to end up on enemy's territory. You're going to get cheeseburger. And same when you're losing. Well, Huokyu Bing, in my opinion, is a very streaky commander that does his best when your side is winning, right? Because when your side is winning, he's getting the kills. He's actually healing himself, so he's keeping his troop count high. And that's where you get these like massive, like crazy reports. But if your side's losing, basically Huokyu Bing isn't getting the kills. One, you're not healing yourself, right? But two, you're not even actually in that, off the top of my head, I can't remember whatever mode he's in, when he has a reduced rage count, he actually becomes a very, very mid cav commander, right? Huokyu Bing, the first 30 seconds of a fight is really good, but if he's not stacking kills where he keeps getting that, he's actually very mid. He's just worse than Nevsky, right? And also another thing to think about, and I don't want this to turn into a HQ hating video, right? But Woking Bean actually doesn't offer a lot of hidden benefits, right? There's nothing there. The best he has is like a debuff where he kind of slows down the opponent. Well, not kind of, he slows down the opponent, which a lot of commanders have nowadays, right? So depending on whether your side is winning or losing, also some commanders shine and then some commanders actually struggle, right? So having given you all these scenarios, and there's actually a lot more that I didn't list, right? And there's probably even some other attributes people could list. For me, I think the best March is the best balance of all of these. And when it's really, really balanced, then in these scenarios, overall, they should perform the best overall in these scenarios, right? So before I move on to the next page, let's just talk about this comparison of, say, Lucia Alex and then Scipio Lucia, right? I know a lot of people think Scipio Lucia is the best March in the game, right? And if we go over this, Scipio Lucia will beat Lucia Alex in a duel, right? Again, low priority, don't really care about that. Short duration, Scipio Lucia will do a little worse than Lucia Alex. Scipio actually also has an instant proc. If you look at it, and this is why it's crazy to me that people think Ragnar is better. Scipio actually has a 1500 damage factor instant proc, right? But it's additional damage. So it's going to do 500, but then essentially you have like a burn or a poison effect where the next 2 seconds you do another 500. I've tested this before. As soon as it triggers, you can actually march away, and then the next 2 turns will actually do the 500 damage factor for the next 2 turns, whether you're connected or not, right? So it's a 1500 damage factor instant proc on top of its 3 target AoE, right? Like even the damage output between Scipio and Ragnar is that far apart. But for some reason, people see the additional damage and Ragnar's active skill, and it registers for them that it's a lot of damage, but it's almost like they discount Scipio's instant proc altogether, right? So Scipio does have an instant proc. He's good at short duration. He's just slightly worse than Alex in the short duration, right? In a connected ball fight, Scipio Lucia is going to do more damage than Lucia Alex, right? Like you just look at the kit, it's obvious it's going to do more damage. But Alex has one of the best hidden benefits or debuffs in the game, okay? Not only is the target taking 30% more damage, 3 targets are taking 30% more damage for 4 seconds. Whereas Scipio, right, he has a 30% health debuff. I did the math. My calculation or how I want to value that is that it's essentially making the target take about like 14 to 18% damage, depending on which true type you're hitting and how much health they already have, okay? Another way to think about it, okay, this isn't the exact math. I'm just going to present it to you this way, so hopefully you guys can weigh this, okay? When Alex's act is skilled, his debuff is going off, it's almost like 3 targets are taking probably like around like between 45 to 50% health debuff, right? To me, off the top of my head, that's probably about how much taking 30% more damage is worth, right? So maybe Alex actually isn't doing as much damage as Scipio when paired with Lucia in a connected ball fight, but that hidden benefit swings to me heavily in Alex's favor, right? So how do you actually like measure that, right? Which is why when I look at the reports manager, Alex trades better. Funny enough, because you're not always doing the connected ball fights, right? Usually, unless you're at a very high level Imperium where the sides are pretty evenly matched. There's a lot more of these other scenarios where not only does Alex trade better, does more damage, but the hidden benefit swings heavily in the Lucia Alex's favor over Scipio Lucia. That's why I think Lucia Alex is the best March in the game, and it's super fun, right? And what are the other things I listed here? Right, it has good trades, it's super fun, it has one of the best hidden benefits, it's super fast, it's faster than Scipio Lucia, it's not tanky, Scipio is way tankier, and it does more damage because of the scenarios of the fights it gets in, right? So that's why I think Lucia Alex is the best. And usually the pushback I get when I say that is people will be like, well, Scipio's a better commander, which I'm not arguing he is, or 1960 recommends Scipio Lucia, right? Which I'll get to my next slide. Or the next page, right? Okay, 1960 recommends them. And to which I'll counter, I would highly recommend people have the ability to think for themselves, okay? On the right here, this picture, for a huge part of human history, human beings thought, or at least the Western civilization, thought that the Earth was the center of the universe, right? And then when you when you ask them to justify it, because if the Earth wasn't the center of the universe and the Earth was actually spinning around the sun, how come, for example, there isn't a constant wind that you're feeling, right? If the Earth is constantly moving, you would feel a wind. I mean, that logic just on the surface makes sense, right? Or if the Earth is constantly spinning, how come when you drop a ball, it seems like it's going straight down and it's not actually like moving a little bit to the left or right, right? Because if the Earth is spinning, you would think the ball wouldn't drop straight down, it would actually move, right? Those are all valid reasonings, right? And, you know, for the most part, for a huge part of our human history, most people believe that the Earth was the center of the universe, right? Now, we're not going to get into that history. Hopefully you guys learned how, like from like Newton and everything, they ended up solving it. But it actually shows that, hey, you know, just because a lot of people believe something doesn't necessarily mean it's right. Just because, quote unquote, the expert believes something doesn't necessarily mean it's right. And again, I don't want you guys to read too much into this. This is not some political statement. This is a critical thinking statement, okay? Here are some signs where if you're doing this, where you see people doing this, critical thinking is missing, okay? One, if a person is stressed. The way the human body works, the upper mind, basically the part of your brain that can actually hold multiple perspectives and make like executive decisions and not just something that's choice A or choice B, basically more nuanced and complex decisions. The cerebral cortex, as soon as stress hits the cerebral cortex, the ability to use that part of your brain shuts down and you actually go back down into the amygdala where you're in fight or flight mode, right? So if someone's stressed or they're chronically stressed, their ability to critical think is just going to go down severely. Okay, that's just biology. That's not me making that up. All right. This next one, it's not necessarily a bad thing, right? We can't be experts at everything, and if someone has spent a lot more time, they have a lot more knowledge in something, right? It's normal to default to a authority figure or an expert, or even like a text that is viewed as an authority figure, right? And at the same time, when a person or a group of people are doing that, there is no longer any critical thinking there, right? Because instead of actually going and learning the nuances, the basics of that, they're going to default critical thinking to the authority figure, right? So if everyone is like, oh, 1960 says this, you know, we're just going to go with what they say, it could be right. I'm not even arguing that it's wrong. I personally think it's Lucia Alex, right? But there's no critical thinking there. You're literally just defaulting to an authority figure, right? And then third and finally, social pressure, right? So if everyone else around you is saying something, right? Well, you don't want to, you want to be in the warm end of the pool. You don't want to say something that's controversial or rock the boat, right? It's a natural human behavior to just kind of go with a socially accepted point of view, right? So when it comes to the best March, best 3 March, whatever, what I would highly recommend, this game, it is a lot to learn, but it's not that much, right? If you're going to spend a lot of money and time playing this game, you might as well understand how the game works, you know, how a lot of this stuff works, so that you can think for yourself. Most of the time, right, the authority figures or the experts are probably right? Most of the time, if the community agrees on something, it's probably accurate. But there are times when it's not. And if you can actually critical think for yourself, right, you can actually start deciphering when, you know, most people are right. And then sometimes, like, just because a lot of people say something, that actually might not be the best March in the game, and you can actually go with something else. All right. This is, again, just something to make you think. Don't read too much into it. But if you watch all the way to the end of the video, you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. Again, thank you guys for watching, and I'll talk to you next time.